Hello, I'm Billy, and this is Show and Tell. Today, I have no finished objects. I have a work in progress I'm going to tell you about in great detail. I have an upcoming trip I'm going to share with you and how I went about planning that and planning out my knitting for that trip. And I have one unusual acquisition that is quasi-knitting related.
And action.
First of all, a big shout out to my friend Larry. 5 days a week, I take an opera appreciation class. And over the last year and a half or so, I've gotten to know the people in the class rather well. And one of them offered to critique my channel. And I asked him to please be kind, be gentle with me, because I don't think too many people who know me actually watch my channel. I think most of you are strangers. And I really was bearing my inner soul. The one suggestion that he gave me was when I'm showing something that's not finished, to hold it up on my person so that you could see where it's hitting me. Later on, I will do that, but this is the garment in question. It's been quite a while that I've been mentioning my eagerness to fly out of the United States and get back to my regular routine of international travel. So the Shetland Wool Week presented itself. I have never been to a wool festival overseas. I've never even been to Rhinebeck, although that's shortly to be rectified, I hope. Anyway, getting back to Shetland. If you remember back when I was knitting the Bowknot sweater, the Schiaparelli Bowknot sweater, there was a woman in the group, Maria Elena. It turns out she lives only a short distance away from me, maybe a 5 or 10 minute walk. And we've become somewhat friendly. And when I said that I was planning to go to Shetland, she was like, "Oh, I'll go." And I thought, well, that's great. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a knitting buddy to go to such an event with? So we are booked. I'm somewhat of a planner. The first thing I wanted to make sure was that we had a place to stay. And when I looked at lodging, Airbnb and Vrbo, etc., and even the Shetland Tourist Bureau, I found almost nothing available. People have been booking these places years in advance. It's a very, very popular event. And especially there's pent up demand because they didn't do it live the last couple of years. Finally, I found an entire house, and I think it's in a very good situation. I was hoping to be more towards the center of Lerwick, but it's kind of off the beaten path a little bit, in between the ferry terminal and where some of the museums are. So I think it's going to be a pretty doable walk in both directions. Jameson and Smith is spitting distance from the house that we've rented. So I'm really excited about that. Once I got the house locked in, the next thing I wanted to do was the ferry, because if you can't get to the island, then you have no trip. Well, as luck would have it, Maria Elena researched that aspect of it and found there was plenty of availability. We're not planning to arrive for day one. We're going to arrive for the second day. I thought that might ease up the amount of people traveling. So we have our little pods booked. I didn't book a cabin because I thought it might feel claustrophobic. I'm still really quite a bit freaked out by COVID and intend to wear my mask a great deal of the time, especially indoors. So I wanted someplace that would be a little more open, that I'd have easy access to the outdoors. Anyway, booked the ferry. The third thing I did was make sure that we got ourselves booked on some of the events that Shetland Wool Week was planning. So as soon as they announced the start date for the box office to open, I made sure that I was at my computer with all of my ducks in a row, and I just went click, 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 buy, and I got all the things that I wanted for all of us. So we're going to be making a trip to Unst, a whole day trip, and I will be taking you along as much as I can. I don't know if my phone will hold very much video, but I'm going to try. I might even do some live things so that I can delete them off my phone right away. So a full day in Unst. We're also going to be going to the Jameson's factory. I don't have a lot of knowledge yet, but it seems to me like there are two major Shetland wool manufacturers, and it's confusing because they both have Jameson in their name. One is Jameson's of Shetland, the other is Jameson and Smith. We'll be visiting both. Jameson's of Shetland runs a bus to the west side of the island, which is some ways away from what I gather. And we'll be getting a guided tour of their spinning mill. We will see all the parts of the process, from the raw fleece to the finished yarns and knitwear. And we're going over to Bressig, which is an island that's off the coast of where we'll be staying, to see a croft, which is like a farm. And the man who owns this place raises a variety of different animals. So there's a lot there to look forward to. And I'm so glad that I'm finally going to be able to make this trip. Before we get to the Shetlands, we'll stop in Edinburgh where our flight lands. And on our way back, we'll be in Edinburgh again. So I know that there's some interesting yarn shops there. In fact, Melanie Gall mentioned her friend owns one of them, so I'm going to be sure not to miss seeing that one. And I'm hoping that we'll make a day trip to Glasgow to see the home of Charles Rennie Mackintosh, who was a designer. Many of you may be familiar with the Glasgow Rose. I'm even thinking of making a shawl with a Glasgow Rose pattern on it. Now, a big part of travel, for me at least, is knitting on the way to and from my destination. So I want to have this sweater finished before I go so that I can wear it there. So I won't be working on that on the plane. And the works in progress that I have really don't lend themselves to sitting and knitting. They're too far into the project to make it interesting. So I'm going to most likely be casting on. What I'm casting on, I haven't yet decided, because I really want to do all of my wool buying when I'm overseas. I don't want to buy wool here to take with me. So I'm a little bit perplexed about what that's going to be, but I definitely want to have something on my needles. Possibly I'll be doing the crochet pattern that I've been talking about. But I wanted to show you how I'm planning for my yarn purchases, since I've told you before that I do not stock an inventory of yarn. I don't keep stash in my apartment. What I've done is I've put on Ravelry some of the projects that I'm looking forward to knitting in the future, and I have prioritized those for the things I want to buy yarn for while I'm in Scotland. This is my queue on Ravelry. These are some upcoming sweaters that I'm hoping to be knitting. And I thought it would be interesting to purchase some of the yarn while I'm in Scotland. Shetland is so famous for Shetland wool. So when I come back, I should have some serious acquisitions to share with you. The acquisitions I wanted to share with you today are crochet related. I've been talking for a while about a 1950s blouse that I'd like to crochet on a very tiny crochet hook using size 30 crochet thread. So I happened to acquire an array of different size crochet hooks, starting from 00. If you can see that, this one, thickest one. In this little bundle, there's 00, 1, and 2. You can see how fine they are. But as the numbers increase, the needles get finer and finer. Here's a number 6. Seven, 8, 9, these are 10s. The 11s are so sharp that they come with this little cap. So these are the 11s. And the finest of all, 12. It's almost like the size of a pinhead. It could really hurt somebody if you're not careful with it. That one has a cap too. Because I'm larger than the pattern size calls for, I'm probably going to use a bigger crochet hook. But there will come a time that I will invite you to join me on this crochet along. And this is really going to be geared to people who knit, who would like to venture into the crochet realm, especially because it is vintage. So if you're one of those people and you need one of these tiny crochet hooks, reach out to me, we'll work something out. Okay, the main attraction it's called For the Rink or the Links. It's a 1930s pattern, and it was meant for somebody who was going to be either golfing or ice skating, so an outdoor active person. It is stranded, so there's a good thickness to it. I'm using a fingering weight yarn, so pretty fine. I'm on a size 2 needle, but because of the stranding on the back, it has quite a good thickness. I'm sure that it's going to be warm. So let me tell you a little bit about my modifications to this pattern. First of all, the pattern is written for a size that's not mine, so I wanted to scale it up a little bit. I went to a slightly larger needle size, and as I was knitting, I was checking my gauge to make sure that I would have enough width to go around my bust. It's a little hard to see because I have everything held on cords right now, so this is not spread out to its full width. It is a V-neck. I don't know if you can see that. This is the back, but the front has a V-neck. I'm hoping that the armhole depth is going to be long enough. Of course, if it's not, I'll actively block it. One thing that I did a little differently on this sweater is instead of casting on here and knitting the ribbing, because I'm not sure how much ribbing I want, I'm not sure how it's going to lay when it's on me, I did a provisional cast on here. And I cast on directly, instead of onto scrap yarn, I cast onto the cord of the size 1 needle that I was going to be doing the ribbing on. So instead of doing a provisional cast on around a piece of scrap yarn, I did it around that cord. So the cord would already be in there ready for me to knit when I was up to the part where I would knit down to do the ribbing. So I started here and I knit up. On the sides where I wanted some extra stitches, I put a stitch marker towards the end of the row, and any stitches that were outside of that indicated to me those are the stitches that I had increased. So by the time I got up to the underarm, I had already increased about 10 stitches on either side to give myself more room across the bust, all the while staying in pattern. By the time I got up to here, I was quite familiar with how this pattern worked. So even if the instructions, it's not charted, each line is written out. Knit 3 of this color, knit 4 of the next color, and so on. But by the time I got to the underarm, I was familiar enough with how this pattern was working that I could just add on some extra stitches. In fact, there are a couple of places where I didn't hold exactly true to the pattern. I was playing yarn chicken a little bit with my light color. So in a few places, let me see if I can find one to show you. I think, yeah, around maybe around in here. I didn't do all those little individual stitches that are like this, one, and then on the next row, one, and the next row, one. I just left them off because I knew that later on I could come back and duplicate stitch over to give me that pattern if I need to. I do have a couple of errors which I will rectify at the end by doing duplicate stitch. On this row, I left out a red at the bottom of each V, so I'll come back in and fix that. And down here, I put my red stitch slightly skewed. That was at the very, very beginning. I wasn't at all familiar with the pattern then. I didn't have an eye to pick up, oh, there's a mistake. But by and large, I haven't had any errors, just a very few. I'm currently knitting the sleeves. And I learned my lesson in a recent project where one sleeve came out slightly different than the other because I knit them at two separate times. And my gauge was slightly different, which I guess can happen to anybody on any given day. So I am knitting these sleeves. I'm knitting these sleeves two at a time. Once again, I did a provisional cast on here and started knitting up. I still have this cord in with my needle because I am not at the underarm yet, but it's not really clear to me from the pattern just how long this has to be. In the pattern, they say that they knit their sample for somebody with particularly long arms. So I knew right away I couldn't go by that. I don't have long arms. I'm only 5 feet tall. So I paused up here, left my needle in, and I went back to where my provisional cast on was. And I am currently knitting the ribbing down from here. So here's my needle. It might make more sense to you if I flip this upside down. I am knitting up here. So I'm growing the ribbing. I think I have about 5.5 inches of ribbing so far, but I'm shooting for 6. And when I get to maybe 6, 6.5, I'll probably baste one of these sleeves and try it on and make sure that it's fitting all the way up. And then I'll know how much more I have to do before I start decreasing for the sleeve cap. Now, because I've altered the arm side, I am most likely going to have to tinker with the shape of the sleeve cap. Stay tuned for that and wish me luck. It's always a trick. So now you know what my plans are for the fall, especially my knitting plans. I would love if you would share in the comments below any upcoming plans that you have. Are you knitting vintage? What patterns are you thinking of knitting? Do you have more than one thing that you're hoping to accomplish before the end of the year? Please share it with the rest of us. We want to see what you're working on too. Has it ever happened to you that you put your knitting on a cable with stoppers, taking off your interchangeable needles, and then you come back to it a month later and you forget what needle size you used? And of course, you've recorded it in Ravelry, but oops, you forgot to change the needle size on Ravelry when you changed the needle size in your knitting. Well, it's certainly happened to me, and I've ended up with sleeves that were 2 different sizes because I put the wrong needle size on. So I have come up with a quick tip for you. What size needle do you think I need to put on here? I put the number of stitch markers to indicate the needle size. So I know when I come back to this, I'm going to take the stopper off and I'm going to put on a size 3 needle and I will be back in business. I think that wraps it up for today. So next time you see me, I'm likely to be in the Shetland Islands. Till then, Toodaloo. Take care, everyone, and stay safe, please. The YouTube algorithm suggests that you watch this video next. I suggest this playlist to you.